God's Warrior, Joshua's Conquest by Brenda White. Joshua is a key figure in the Jewish history that lived approximately 1355 BC to 1245 BC. He was Moses' leading commander and had been with him since leaving Egypt. Not long after Moses had led the Jews out of Egypt and they had crossed the Red Sea, the Amalekites came and attacked the Israelites. Moses called on Joshua to choose some of our men and go out to fight the Amalekites. Joshua did as he was told. He was faithful to Moses and kept his teachings close at heart. When Moses and the Israelites had arrived at Mount Sinai, God called Moses up to the mountain to meet with him. Joshua had waited patiently at the foot of the mountain for Moses to return. The story rocks on from there. God becomes angry with the Israelites for casting an idol. Moses pleads their cause. God has mercy on them, and their journey continues. As they grew closer to the promised land, the Lord said to Moses, "Send some men to explore the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the Israelites. From each ancestral tribe, send one of its leaders." Then God gives Moses a list of men who sends to send, and Moses changes the name of Hoshea, son of Nun, to Joshua. He was one of the 2 scouts that returned from their mission with the confidence that they could take these giants that inhabited the land. Joshua was a brave and loyal servant. When Moses' time was drawing to a close, he summoned Joshua to him. He said to him in the presence of all Israel, "Be strong and courageous, for you must go with this people into the land the Lord swore to their forefathers to give them, and you must divide it among them as their inheritance. The Lord himself goes before you and will be with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged." Later, after Moses had finished giving all of God's decrees, he went up on Mount Nebo, where God showed him all of the territory he had promised to give Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Moses died there on Mount Nebo, and after Moses had passed, Joshua was filled with the spirit of wisdom because Moses had laid hands on him. The Israelites knew Joshua had been commissioned as their leader and that he had gained Moses' wisdom. Therefore, they willingly followed him. Soon after Moses' death, the Lord spoke to him, saying, "Moses, my servant, is dead. Now then, you and all these people get ready to cross the Jordan River into the land that I am about to give them, to the Israelites. I will give you every place where you set your foot, as I had promised Moses." After 3 days, the officers went through the camp giving orders to the people. "When you see the Ark of the Covenant of your Lord, your God, and the priests who are Levites carrying it, you are to move from your positions and follow it. But keep your distance and do not go near it." As the priests who carried the Ark of the Lord came to the edge of the Jordan and stepped into the water, the flow of the river stopped and the water piled upon itself. After the entire nation had crossed over Jordan, Joshua commanded 12 men, one from each of the tribes, to go over before the ark of the Lord your God into the middle of the Jordan. Each of you is to take up a stone on his shoulder, according to the number of the tribes of the Israelites, to serve as a sign among you. They were then told to stack these stones on the bank of the river as a reminder of that the Israelites had crossed over the river. The priests that were carrying the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord remained where they were until all that the Lord had commanded was finished. Then they came out of the Jordan, and as soon as their feet touched dry ground, the waters of the river resumed its flow. All the kings of the surrounding area heard that God had held back the waters of the Jordan while they passed, and they were wrecked with fear and no longer had the courage to attack. It was during this time that God told Joshua to make flint knives and circumcise all the Israelites that had been born during their time in the desert. Now, when Joshua was near Jericho, he looked up and saw a man standing in front of him with a drawn sword in his hand. Joshua went up to him and asked, "Are you for us, or are you for our enemies?" "Neither," he replied, "but as the commander of the army of the Lord have now come." Then Joshua fell face down on the ground in reverence and asked him, "What message does my Lord have for his servant?" The commander of the Lord's army replied, "Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy." And Joshua did so. The city of Jericho was on lockdown because of the fear of the Israelites. Joshua was told to have his men march around the city walls with all the armed men. He was instructed to have his 7 priests carry trumpets and march in front of the Ark of the Covenant. They were to do this for 7 days. The first 6 days they were to march around one at a time with the trumpets blowing. But on the 7th day, they were told to march around 7 times, and as the soldiers remained quiet, on the 7th time around the city, when the trumpets sounded, Joshua told them to give a loud shout, saying, "Shout, for the Lord has given you the city and all that is in it are to be devoted to the Lord." Before the walls of the city of Jericho had fallen, Joshua had told his army to leave the devoted things, but the greed of one man cost them dearly. God saw that Achan had gone against him, and his anger burned against Israel. Joshua, not knowing the sin had been committed, sent about 3,000 men to conquer the city of Ai. But they were routed by the men of Ai, who killed about 36 of them. They chased the Israelites from the city gate as far as the stone quarries and struck them down on the slopes. At this, Joshua tore his clothes and fell face down before the Ark of the Covenant, and he prayed, "Ah, sovereign Lord, why did you ever bring this people across the Jordan to deliver us into the hands of the Amorites to destroy us? Oh Lord, what can I say now that Israel has been routed by its enemies?" To this God replied, "Stand up. What are you doing down on your face? Israel has sinned. They have violated my covenant, which I commanded them to keep. They have taken some of the devoted things. They have stolen. They have lied. They have put them with their possessions. That is why the Israelites cannot stand against their enemies. They turn their backs and run because they have been made liable to destruction. I will not be with you any more unless you destroy whatever among you is devoted to destruction." So Joshua had the tribes and all their belongings searched the next day. When he came to Achan, Achan confessed to the taking of the things and burying them beneath his possessions in his tent. After the items were retrieved, Joshua, along with the rest of the Israelites, took Achan and all that was his out into the valley of Achor. They stoned him and his family, then heaped their possessions on top of them and burned them. Then they heaped rocks on top of Achan, and the Lord's anger subsided. After the Lord had turned his anger away from Israel, the Lord sent Joshua's men back to Ai, and the Lord told Joshua, "Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. Take the whole army with you and go up and attack Ai, for I have delivered into your hands the king of Ai, his people, his city, and his land. You shall do to Ai and its king as you did to Jericho and its king, except that you may carry off their plunder and livestock for yourselves. Set an ambush behind the city." So Joshua calls his army, and they devise a plan to ambush the city and overtake it. After the people of Ai had been killed and the city had been taken, Joshua's men carried off all the plunder and the livestock, just as God had said. Joshua and his army made their way through the promised land, conquering city after city. One by one, they had put the kings to their deaths. And the king of Gibeon had made peace with Israel and joined forces. The king of Jerusalem, Adoni-Zedek, heard of the treaty and decided to attack Gibeon. Adoni-Zedek recruited the kings of the surrounding area to help. Come up and help me attack Gibeon, because it has made peace with Joshua and the Israelites. When they attacked, Gibeon sent word to Joshua down in Gilgal, do not abandon your servants. Come up to us quickly and save us. Help us, because all the Amorite kings from the hill country have joined forces against us. So Joshua takes his army and all of his armed men, and they go rescue Gibeon from the attack. They knew they were marching into a battle where they were outnumbered, but God assured Joshua that he would be with them and they would defeat the forces against them. They marched all night, and at dawn they made a surprise attack. The Lord struck them with confusion, and Israel was able to defeat them in Gibeon. Those that ran, Israel pursued. God even threw down hailstones on them and killed them. As the battle went on, Joshua cried out, O sun, stand still over Gibeon. O moon, over the valley of Ajalon. And the sun stood still for a full day until Israel had triumphed over all of her enemies. The kings of the 5 nations that had banded together against Gibeon had ran and were found hiding in a cave. Joshua had them secured in there and guarded until all the Israelites destroyed all of their enemies. Then, after the Israelites had made it back to camp, Joshua had the 5 kings brought out before them. Then he summoned all of the men of Israel and had the commanders stand on the necks of the 5 kings. He told his men, do not be afraid, do not be discouraged. Be strong and courageous. This is what the Lord will do to all of the enemies you are going to fight. Then Joshua struck the men dead and had them hung up in trees. Joshua and the Israelites succeeded in conquering all of the cities that stood against them. All the cities in the southern region and even those in the northern region fell at the hands of Joshua and Israel. After all had been conquered, Joshua had the task of dividing the land among the tribes, dividing it to each tribe just as God had commanded. After the land had been divided, the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and the half tribe of Manasseh returned to their home. They built an altar as a reminder of their allegiance to God and as a symbol of the bond they shared with Israel. But the leaders of the tribes of Israel mistook their motive and thought they were rebelling against God. They went down to Gilead and confronted the leaders of Reuben, Gad, and the half tribe of Manasseh, and it was there where they found out there was all a misunderstanding. Those that had went down to confront them took the news back to Israel and were happy about the report. They praised God for the news, and the Reubenites and Gadites gave the altar the name of a witness between us that the Lord is God. After many years of rest and peace in Israel, Joshua called all of his leaders of his tribes together. He told them he was very old and his time was drawing close. Before Joshua died at the age of 110, he reminded the people of Israel to always keep the commands of the Lord. He reminded them all the things that the Lord had done for them. Then the people answered, far be it for us to forsake the Lord, to serve other gods. It was the Lord our God himself who brought us and our parents up out of Egypt and performed those great things before our eyes. He protected us on the entire journey and among all the nations through which we traveled. And the Lord drove out before us all the nations, including the Amorites who lived in the land. We too will serve the Lord because he is our God. After Joshua ensured the people of Israel were certain about serving God and not the gods of their ancestors, he made a covenant for the people, and at Shechem he drew up the decrees of the laws. He then recorded them in the book of the law of God. A large stone was placed under an oak tree as a witness of the covenant the people had made with God. After these things, Joshua of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died, and they buried him in the land of his inheritance.